Section 3 of From Plotzk to Boston. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. From Plotzk to Boston by Mary Antin. Section 3. The man in the office wouldn't believe it, and we were given over in charge of a woman in a dark gray dress and a long white apron with a red cross on her right arm. She led us away and thoroughly searched us all, as well as our baggage. That was nice treatment, like what we had been receiving since our first uninterrupted entrance into Germany. Always a call for money, always suspicion of our presence, and always rough orders and scowls of disapproval, even at the quickest obedience. And now this outrageous indignity. We had to bear it all because we were going to America from a land cursed by the dreadful epidemic. Others besides ourselves shared these trials, the last one included, if that were any comfort, which it was not. When the woman reported the result of the search as being fruitless, the man was satisfied, and we were ordered with the rest through many more examinations and ceremonies before we should be established under the quarantine, for that it was. While waiting for our turn to be examined by the doctor, I looked about, thinking it worth while to get acquainted with a place where we might be obliged to stay for I knew not how long. The room where we were sitting was large, with windows so high up that we couldn't see anything through them. In the middle stood several long wooden tables, and around these were settees of the same kind. On the right, opposite the doctor's office, was a little room where various things could be bought of a young man, if you hadn't paid all your money for other things. When the doctor was through with us, he told us to go to number 5. Now wasn't that like in a prison? We walked up and down a long yard looking among a row of low, numbered doors for hours, when we heard an exclamation of, "Oh, Esther, how do you happen to be here?" And on seeing the speaker, found it to be an old friend of ours from Plotzk. She had gone long before us, but her ship hadn't arrived yet. She was surprised to see us, because we had no intention of going when she went. What a comfort it was to find a friend among all the strangers. She showed us at once to our new quarters, and while she talked to Mamma, I had time to see what they were like. It looked something like a hospital, only less clean and comfortable, more like the soldiers' barracks I had seen. I saw a very large room, around whose walls were ranged rows of high iron double bedsteads, with coarse sacks stuffed with something like matting, and not over clean blankets for the only bedding, except where people used their own. There were 3 windows almost touching the roof, with nails covering all the framework. From the ceiling hung 2 round gas lamps, and almost under them stood a little wooden table and a settee. The floor was of stone. Here was a pleasant prospect. We had no idea how long this unattractive place might be our home. Our friend explained that number 5 was only for Jewish women and girls, and the beds were sleeping rooms, dining rooms, parlors, and everything else, kitchens excepted. It seemed so, for some were lounging on the beds, some sitting up, some otherwise engaged, and all were talking and laughing and making a great noise. Poor things, there was nothing else to do in that prison. Before Mother had told our friend of our adventures, a girl, also a passenger, who had been walking in the yard, ran in and announced, "It's time to go to dinner. He has come already." He, we soon learned, was the overseer of the Jewish special kitchen, without whom the meals were never taken. All the inmates of number 5 rushed out in less than a minute, and I wondered why they hurried so. When we reached the place that served as dining room, there was hardly any room for us. Now, while dinner is being served, I will tell you what I can see. In the middle of the yard stood a number of long tables covered with white oilcloth. On either side of each table stood benches on which all the Jewish passengers were now seated, looking impatiently at the door with the sign "Jewish Kitchen" over it. Pretty soon a man appeared in the doorway, tall, spare, with a thin pointed beard, and an air of importance on his face. It was he, the overseer, who carried a large tin pail filled with black bread cut into pieces of half a pound each. He gave a piece to every person, the youngest child and the biggest man alike, and then went into the kitchen and filled his pail with soup and meat, giving everybody a great bowl full of soup and a small piece of meat. All attacked their rations as soon as they received them, and greatly relished the coarse bread and dark, hot water they called soup. We couldn't eat those things, and only wondered how any one could have such an appetite for such a dinner. We stopped wondering when our own little store of provisions gave out. After dinner the people went apart, some going back to their beds, and others to walk in the yard or sit on the settees there. There was no other place to go to. The doors of the prison were never unlocked, except when new passengers arrived or others left for their ships. The fences, they were really solid walls, had wires and nails on top, so that one couldn't even climb to get a look at the sea. We went back to our quarters to talk over matters and rest from our journey. At 6 o'clock the doctor came with a clerk, and standing before the door bade all those in the yard belonging to number 5 assemble there, and then the roll was called, and everybody received a little ticket as she answered to her name. With this all went to the kitchen and received 2 little rolls and a large cup of partly sweetened tea. This was supper, and breakfast served too in this way was the same. Any wonder that people hurried to dinner and enjoyed it. And it was always the same thing, no change. Little by little we became used to the new life, though it was hard to go hungry day after day, and bear the discomforts of the common room shared by so many, the hard beds (we had little bedding of our own), and the confinement to the narrow limits of the yard, and the tiresome sameness of the life. Meal hours, of course, played the most important part, while the others had to be filled up as best we could. The weather was fine most of the time, and that helped much. Everything was an event, the arrival of fresh passengers a great one which happened every day. The day when the women were allowed to wash clothes by the well was a holiday, and the few favorite girls who were allowed to help in the kitchen were envied. On dull, rainy days the man coming to light the lamps at night was an object of pleasure, and every one made the best of everybody else. So when a young man arrived who had been to America once before, he was looked up to by every person there as a superior, his stories of our future home listened to with delight, and his manners imitated by all, as a sort of fit preparation. He was wanted everywhere, and he made the best of his greatness by taking liberties and putting on great airs, and, I afterwards found, imposing on our ignorance very much. But anything the American did passed for good, except his going away a few days too soon. Then a girl came who was rather wanting a little brightness, so all joined in imposing upon her by telling her a certain young man was a great professor whom all owed respect and homage to, and she would do anything in the world to express hers, while he used her to his best advantage, like the willing slave she was. Nobody seemed to think this unkind at all, and it really was excusable that the poor prisoners, hungry for some entertainment, should try to make a little fun when the chance came. Besides, the girl had opened the temptation by asking, who was the handsome man in the glasses, a professor surely, showing that she took glasses for a sure sign of a professor, and professor for the highest possible title of honor. Doesn't this excuse us? The greatest event was the arrival of some ship to take some of the waiting passengers. When the gates were opened and the lucky ones said good-bye, those left behind felt hopeless of ever seeing the gates open for them. It was both pleasant and painful, for the strangers grew to be fast friends in a day, and really rejoiced in each other's fortune, but the regretful envy could not be helped either. Amid such events as these a day was like a month at least. 8 of these we had spent in quarantine when a great commotion was noticed among the people of number 5 and those of the corresponding number in the men's division. There was a good reason for it. You remember that it was April and Passover was coming on. In fact, it began that night. The great question was, would we be able to keep it exactly according to the host of rules to be obeyed? You who know all about the great holiday can understand what the answer to that question meant to us. Think of all the work and care and money it takes to supply a family with all the things proper and necessary, and you will see that to supply a few hundred was no small matter. Now, were they going to take care that all was perfectly right, and could we trust them if they promised? Or should we be forced to break any of the laws that ruled the holiday? All day long there was talking and questioning and debating and threatening that we would rather starve than touch anything we were not sure of, and we meant it. So some men and women went to the overseer to let him know what he had to look out for. He assured them that he would rather starve along with us than allow anything to be in the least wrong. Still, there was more discussing and shaking of heads, for they were not sure yet. There was not a crumb anywhere to be found, because what bread we received was too precious for any of it to be wasted. But the women made a great show of cleaning up number 5, while they sighed and looked sad, and told one another of the good hard times they had at home getting ready for Passover. Really hard as it is, when one is used to it from childhood, it seems part of the holiday and can't be left out. To sit down and wait for supper as on other nights seemed like breaking one of the laws, so they tried hard to be busy. At night we were called by the overseer, who tried to look more important than ever in his holiday clothes, not his best though, to the feast spread in one of the unoccupied rooms. We were ready for it and anxious enough. We had had neither bread nor matzah for dinner, and were more hungry than ever, if that is possible. We now found everything really prepared. There were pillows covered with a snow-white spread, new oilcloth on the newly scrubbed tables, some little candles stuck in a basin of sand on the window-sill for the women, and a sure sign of the holiday, both gas lamps burning. Only one was used on other nights. Happy to see these things and smell the supper, we took our places and waited. Soon the cook came in and filled some glasses with wine from 2 bottles, one yellow, one red. Then she gave to each person exactly 1½ matzahs, also some cold meat burned almost to a coal for the occasion. The young man, bless him, who had the honor to perform the ceremonies, was, fortunately for us all, one of the passengers. He felt for and with us, and it happened, just a coincidence, that the greater part of the ceremony escaped from his book as he turned the leaves. Though strictly religious, nobody felt in the least guilty about it, especially on account of the wine, for when we came to the place where you have to drink the wine, we found it tasted like good vinegar, which made us all choke and gasp, and one little girl screamed, "Poison!" so that all laughed, and the leader, who tried to go on, broke down too at the sight of the wry faces he saw, while the overseer looked shocked. The cook nearly set her gown on fire by overthrowing the candles with her apron, used to hide her face, and all wished our master overseer had to drink that wine all his days. Think of the same ceremony as it is at home, then of this one just described. Do they even resemble each other? Well, the leader got through amid much giggling and sly looks among the girls who understood the trick, and frowns of the older people who secretly blessed him for it. Then, half hungry, all went to bed and dreamed of food in plenty. No other dreams? Rather, for the day that brought the Passover brought us, our own family, the most glorious news. We had been ordered to bring our baggage to the office. Ordered to bring our baggage to the office? That meant nothing less than we were going the next day. It was just after supper that we received the welcome order. Oh, who cared if there wasn't enough to eat? Who cared for anything in the whole world? We didn't. It was all joy and gladness and happy anticipation for us. We laughed and cried and hugged one another, and shouted and acted altogether like wild things. Yes, we were wild with joy, and long after the rest were asleep we were whispering together and wondering how we could keep quiet the whole night. We couldn't sleep by any means. We were so afraid of oversleeping the great hour, and every little while after we tried to sleep One of us would suddenly think she saw day at the window, and wake the rest, who also had only been pretending to sleep while watching in the dark for daylight. When it came, it found no watchful eye after all. The excitement gave way to fatigue, and drowsiness first, then deep sleep completed its victory. It was 8 o'clock when we awoke. The morning was cloudy and chilly, the sun being too lazy to attend to business. Now and then it rained a little too, and yet it was the most beautiful day that had ever dawned on Hamburg. We enjoyed everything offered for breakfast, 2 matzos and 2 cups of tea apiece. Why, it was a banquet. After it came the good-byes, as we were going soon. As I told you before, the strangers became fast friends in a short time under the circumstances, so there was real sorrow at the partings, though the joy of the fortunate ones was, in a measure, shared by all. About 1 o'clock, we didn't go to dinner, we couldn't eat for excitement, we were called. There were 3 other families, an old woman and a young man among the Jewish passengers who were going with us, besides some Polish people. We were all hurried through the door we had watched with longing for so long, and were a little way from it when the old woman stopped short and called on the rest to wait. "We haven't any matzos," she cried in alarm. "Where's the overseer?" Sure enough, we had forgotten it, when we might as well have left one of us behind. We refused to go, calling for the overseer, who had promised to supply us, and the man who had us in charge grew angry and said he wouldn't wait. It was a terrible situation for us. "Oh," the man said, "you can go and get your matzah, but the boat won't wait for you," and he walked off, followed by the Polish people only. We had to decide at once. We looked at the old woman. She said she wasn't going to start on a dangerous journey with such a sin on her soul. Then the children decided. They understood the matter. They cried and begged to follow the party, and we did. Just when we reached the shore, the cook came up panting hard. She brought us matzah. How relieved we were then! We got on a little steamer, the name is too big for it, that was managed by our conductor alone. Before we had recovered from the shock of the shrill whistle so near us, we were landing in front of a large stone building. Once more we were under the command of the gendarme. We were ordered to go into a big room crowded with people, and wait till the name of our ship was called. Somebody in a little room called a great many queer names, and many passengers answered the call. At last we heard, "Polynesia!" We passed in, and a great many things were done to our tickets before we were directed to go outside, then to a larger steamer than the one we came in. At every step our tickets were either stamped or punched or a piece torn off of them, till we stepped upon the steamer's deck. Then we were ordered below. It was dark there, and we didn't like it. In a little while we were called up again, and then we saw before us the great ship that was to carry us to America. End of Section 3.